Well, it's really nice to see all of you here this afternoon and to have the sunshine streaming into our church. And we extend a really warm welcome to Chris Chapman, who's come all the way over from the village of Blean, just outside Canterbury. So it's a fair old trek, and we appreciate it very much. We just got underway with your book, Earth in God, at the start of Lent, and it was a really helpful Lent course led by Claire, and many of us had the chance to finish the book ourselves. But I know that today has got squeezed out at various times, and nearly got squeezed out again, didn't it? A couple of weeks ago we thought, shall we pull the plug on today? But I got a strong sense that that wasn't appropriate. And that's a measure, I think, of how easily stopping and being quiet just does get squeezed out of our lives. So it's really good that we're here. And I'm going to hand over to Chris, but this is your house. It's God's house, it's your house. Make yourselves at home. I think you know where everything is, but the chapel's there. If you want to go into the parish centre somewhere quiet, you might find it's warm enough to find a sunny, sheltered spot in the churchyard and just help yourself to chairs, the sort of garden chairs or the ones in the centre. Just leave them out there. I can bring them in later on, but just make yourselves as comfortable as you can. Thank you.
So can you hear me okay? Great, that's good. Well, a bit of an echo. I work in the area of spirituality, so helping people explore their experience in the light of their relationship with God. And that takes me in different directions. I do some teaching, I lead retreats, and I accompany people one-to-one in spiritual accompaniment and do some writing. I'm also a gardener. I discovered gardening late in life, and I suspect over these last months, outside space, the garden, the natural world, has been an incredibly important sort of haven and earthing place for us. When everything is kind of so uncertain and so unfamiliar, to be able to touch earth and to be able to see the movement of a tree or a seed growing, to let yourself be caught up in wonder at another movement of life. So what we're going to do today is think about this season. Now this season, both in the natural world, which is a time both of fruitfulness and harvest, and also the beginning of fall. Somebody told me the other day that you think of fall as a kind of Americanism for autumn, but actually it's quite an old English word for describing this time of year. The sense of things beginning to fall away, fall down, reconnect with the earth. So we'll think about that season in the natural world, but also the season that we are in right now, with this period of time that we never predicted or wanted, and it's here. And we don't quite know where it's going and how it will be. So hopefully today will allow these two things to speak to each other a little bit. What I'll put some slides on up on the screen. Hopefully you can see them. But if there are words, there won't be too many words on them, but I'll read them out as well, just in case you can't pick up the words. And we'll have two kind of little bits of inputs. The first one will help us reflect a bit about how we are now and what this time has been like for us and how we're feeling right now, picking up on these themes. And in the second, we'll look at fruitfulness and fall, and those two movements of spiritual life. And again, how those speak to maybe what we're experiencing right now, what's going on, what might be going to take place. So we'll build in some spaces in between those two. So if we just for a moment have a moment of quiet together and just settle together into this space, conscious that God is with us, conscious that God knows our needs more deeply than we ourselves know. God of fruitfulness and of fall, we come to you in this uncertain season. We thank you for your enduring presence. Your unceasing labour for us. We thank you that in uncertainty we are still held. And we ask that through these hours we might have a deeper sense and trust in your presence. And an awareness too of your invitation to us, individually and together. Through Christ our Lord. Well, since I've got here, I've taken off 2 layers of clothing. Because when I woke up this morning, it was so cold. In northeast Kent, it was still pouring down with rain. And tree-bending winds, not great. And also, when you're going to a church, you know something's going to be in a church, you kind of come prepared, because churches vary a lot in how warm they are, how drafty they are, but it's very cosy here, so it's good to be here. One thing about seasons is you never really get this nice, neat division. No matter what the Met Office or whoever might tell you, this is the first day of autumn. It doesn't really work like that. Now, there's some sense in which we experience summer and autumn intermingling. Through August sometimes you get that taste. Maybe when it's the cool of an early morning, a different smell in the air of autumn coming. And sometimes in autumn the sun breaks through and it just feels like summer. And sometimes that can happen in a single day. And so these two movements, if you like, of this time, associations of fruitfulness, harvest, we celebrate that now, and just an awareness too of the beginning of the season of fall, a time of letting go. So we give thanks as summer comes to an end for the harvest, for what God has given. And there's that real sense of, when you give thanks, of relationship. I think people of earlier generations had a much deeper sense of that, of dependence on the earth, dependence on the gift of life. So that's awareness of harvest. And then the fall. But even in the fall, there are seeds of life. So I'm one of those people who goes out and I collect seeds from, spent flower heads, like the cornflowers, things like that. And I plant them this time of year for another springtime. And in the natural world, that's happening anyway. They're falling to the ground and they're beginning to be ready to begin another cycle of life. We're a bit too familiar, aren't we, with this picture, or something like it. And it's hard work watching the news. Sometimes I think we just have to have a break from all the statistics. But it is there. And these are just some words of Pope Francis. Like a sudden breaking storm, the coronavirus crisis has caught us all by surprise, abruptly changing on a global level our personal, public, family and working lives. Absolutely. A bit like on Friday, was it? When the weather changed, the storm came in. Various things in my garden got blown over. Some things are no more. A real sudden crashing in. And it's felt like that. We didn't know this was coming. And we are, in a real way, we've been living with uncertainty for quite a while. And we're getting used to doing this strange thing, like sitting in a room with masks on. Like we don't like each other, keeping our distance. We've got used to it. And I don't know about you, but sometimes, when you watch television, you see people together, talking. And it's, oh, I remember that. We've kind of grown accustomed, haven't we? So much that we took for granted has been swept away. There's a real loss around, I think, for many of us. Yet God is present and active for us within this uncertainty. And always there is invitation. Whatever happens, God works through what is, inviting us more deeply into life. So one of the things we might explore is what that invitation to us might be. What we're going to do now is reflect, first of all, just on a personal level, and then more as we are in our life together, on the impact of this unexpected season or seasons. When somebody says, "How are you?" I find that an impossible question. I feel like I can only answer, my real answer would be like a litany. You know, I'm anxious, I'm trustful, I'm enjoying the space and the quiet, I'm missing people, I'm up, I'm down, I feel hopeful, I feel miserable. It's a really hard question to answer, isn't it, in a time of change? It's hard anyway. I remember I had this, somewhere where I worked, I had a colleague, and every morning she would say, "How are you?" And I would say, "I'm fine." And then the next day she'd say, "How are you?" And I'd say, "I'm fine." But actually, at that time, I wasn't fine at all. I was absolutely unfine. So I thought, the next time she asks me, I'm going to say. So she said, "How are you?" And I said, "Well, to tell the truth, I'm not feeling too great at the moment." There was a horrible pause. And then she said, "Well, have you been thinking about the agenda for next week's meeting?" No, and I absolutely understand that, because I broke the rules. But that question, "How are you?" is a big one. So let's just think about how we are. How are you? And that takes in our physical being, what we're feeling. At this moment, during this time, is anything weighing heavily upon you? Is there something you're missing? What's bringing you joy? Sometimes those two things can go together, loss and uncertainty and joy. What do you most need right now? Where is God for you right now? Just spend a few moments, each of us, being ourselves, with all that we're feeling, in the presence of God. Now we look back over these last 6 months or so. What's been happening for you? Is there a particular event over this time, or a particular movement or change that you've been aware of. What's been the impact of this for you? Again, there might be feelings around that change or movement. That's something that's happened suddenly or gradually over this time. Perhaps you felt something then, a while back. What do you feel now? What did you, or are you, learning? What question was raised for you? Perhaps it's still there for you. Maybe there's something you want to rest with God. Something that's been difficult or painful or unresolved. Perhaps too there's something to thank God for. An unexpected joy from this season. Spend a few moments asking God to help us remember and then to rest with God what we've been experiencing during this time. And as we look ahead, the future for you, what are you feeling about the future? What feelings rise for you? Is there anything you hope for? Is there anything that you fear? As you look forward, what do you want to leave behind? And what has begun in this time that you want to continue? Is there a question around for you? Something that feels important to go on seeking an answer to? So we spend just a few moments with God, sharing our thoughts, our feelings, our fears and our desires about the future. All those strands of thoughts and remembering and looking forward. Is there one thing that's come to the surface for you as you've listened to your thoughts and your feelings about your past, your present, your future? And just to spend a moment or two maybe sharing that with God, letting God share his presence with you. Perhaps there are echoes even of that sense of falling away, things you've lost or are losing or you desire to let go of. And perhaps there is a sense of fruit, unexpected fruit, perhaps, through these last months. So having thought about things personally, what we're going to go on to do just for a little while is think about what's been happening around us, in our families, our churches, our neighbourhood where we live, in wider society. And be aware of those movements too. Where is God? And where is the invitation of God as we think about what's been going on? We're a nation that's obsessed with the weather. I never want to miss a weather forecast. I don't mind missing the news, but I like to see the weather forecast, know what's coming. Which doesn't mean that is actually what's going to happen, but I like to see it. And it must have been the same in Jesus' time. He said, you know how to interpret the appearance of the sky. You look at the sky and you see the red of the clouds. Think you know what's coming. But he said, you cannot interpret the signs of the times. So what are the signs of these times? So what have you noticed happening? And as I say, that's not just in our personal lives, but as we're aware of what's happening in our shopping centres and the places where we live, life of our church, what's happening as a nation, what's happening as a worldwide community. It feels like a lot of things have been stirring up. And maybe you've seen things more clearly, and later on we'll explore, perhaps, some of the things that have been going on. But what particular things are you aware of, noticing? What needs seem to be emerging? What different movements are rising and going on? With all the uncertainty, with all the disruption to ordinary church life, the familiar ways of our faith, in many ways this has been a time of spiritual awakening for many people, not just regular churchgoers. Lots of questions around about meaning. Who am I? What is my life for? What matters? How do I meet this uncertainty? Maybe you might be aware of, and maybe things that have been important for you over this time. And perhaps in them, that sense of the wind of the Spirit. Jesus said to Nicodemus, you hear the sound of the wind. You do not know where it comes from or where it is going. And that is how it is with the Holy Spirit. And maybe in your own life, or in your own life as a church, or with your friends, or beyond, outside. Those opportunities that have perhaps emerged through this uncertainty for growing in spiritual life. I have this real sense that Jesus was someone who looked out on the world around him, the life of ordinary people, and he noticed, he felt people's needs. So as we look out beyond ourselves, what seems to be what's missing? There may be things we feel personally, but what's missing in the lives of people around us in our common life? And finally, what is your sense of God's invitation to you as a church? We all have our own stuff to deal with in our own lives, and as a church, there is so much uncertainty and unfamiliarity about how we try and keep alive our life of faith with all the restrictions. But what about our role as church to those beyond the gates, beyond the doors? Perhaps not even just practical and physical needs, but even spiritual needs. People's questioning and uncertainty, and need of safety and a haven. What might you do? What is God's invitation to you? This has probably become a very familiar passage, particularly in those early months of lockdown, when Jesus came into the locked room where the disciples were, fearfully holding together. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met was locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." For a moment we might let Jesus speak that peace to us and where and how we need it. One of my most vivid memories in this period of time is going for a walk with some friends. And at one point we were walking through a tunnel, long tunnel, underneath the M25. And it was very dark, a long, long tunnel, cracks in the ceiling, rather unnervingly. And then one of my friends, he hung back a bit, and recognizing that this tunnel was going to be really, resonant, the sound was really going to bounce, he started singing. He started singing this hymn. And we were sort of towards the far end of the tunnel, and he was this dark silhouette, and this beautiful, strong hymn sort of resounding through the darkness of the tunnel. Something about that image, as together, in a way, we are walking through a tunnel. And not just how God meets us within that, but maybe what's our part in the singing? Jesus said to them, "Peace be with you. As the Father sent me, so I send you." When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. So we'll have a break now, just to let that settle in, and whatever it is that settles in, whatever conversation perhaps might have been begun with God, or glimmer of thoughts as something, and maybe just to hold that and see where it goes in the space. So if we can make sure we're kind of back in our seats by 3:05, would that be okay? So it's about 20 minutes. So it just gives a time, if you want to walk outside, or you take your mask off outside, you get a breath, or stay here and just settle, and then at 3:05 we'll So we're going now to look at what this fruitfulness and fall, these two things that happen together this time of year, how that might speak to this season, how it might begin to inform our understanding of what the invitation of God is to us, individually and together. So the season of harvest and the Psalms are just full of gratitude and wonder about the harvest. You crown the year with your bounty. The pastures of the wilderness overflow. The valleys deck themselves with grain. They shout and sing together with joy. And that real sense of bounty, abundance, generosity, linked with a recognition of relationship, relationship with creation, relationship with God. I always think when you say thank you, it reminds you of a relationship. And sometimes when you don't know any other prayer to pray, saying thank you reminds you of gift, of being in relationship. It lifts the spirits because you're remembering you're not alone, and we do live in a gifted world. I don't know about you, but I've had a lot of apples this year. So quite a lot of apples, and we've got just a couple of little apple trees. And then it wasn't quite scrumping, but there's a sort of an unofficial orchard that no one seems to pick the apples from. So I picked some windfalls from there, and then a friend came and brought more apples. And before you know what's happening, you've got apples everywhere. And that sense of absolute abundance. And with the season of harvest, also the tradition of feast. The harvest festival, we have that. And that's a kind of echo of getting together as a community to remember the giftedness of earth, of God, of rain, of sun, and all that has been produced on which we depend. And doing it together, because we're all in this dependent place, and we need one another. I don't know whether scones and chocolates and Maltesers, whatever, came into, that harvest picture, but it did into this one. So, and that sense of relationship and wonder and thanksgiving, very much echoed in the Bible, thinking about how things grow and the wonder of it. The kingdom of God is as if someone would scatter seed on the ground and would sleep and rise night and day, and the seed would sprout and grow. He does not know how. The earth produces of itself first the stalk, then the head, then the full grain in the head. But when the grain is ripe, at once he goes in with his sickle, because the harvest has come. There is this mystery and wonder about growing things. I definitely grew up knowing I couldn't grow anything. First plant I had care of was a cactus, which I killed. And my dad definitely warded me off the garden because I was, like dangerous or something. And I had this thing that you have to have green fingers. And actually, generally with seeds, all you need to do is give them a chance, i.e. take them out of the packet, and look at the instructions and put them in the earth, and they want to grow. And this miracle of relationship and cooperation, you are involved. You do some work. But still what comes is a wonder. And all of this that reminds us that we are relational people, beings. We are made for relationship. And our growth, our personal growth and the growth of our life together happens through relationship, by what we do, our labour, but also by gift. We live in this giving and receiving of God. That's what the life of God is about, giving and receiving, sharing. And a spirit and a practice of cooperation. As a gardener, that's what you do. You cooperate with nature. You don't master it. You cooperate. I've had a mindful practice, I've noticed, over the last month or so. So I've had lots and lots of Zoom conversations in the last month. I don't know whether you've had to do any of those. I only ever had one of those in my life before March. And now I always seem to be peering at people through a screen. And but my mindful thing is, I have my kind of Zoom, or I have doing my piece of work, and then I was going out into the garden and I'd pick a few more tomatoes. And then I'd do a bit more work, or I'd speak to someone else through a screen. And I'd go out and I'd pick more tomatoes. And just that act of picking tomatoes, connecting with earth, with growing things. We've got a lot of tomatoes. I expect you've had some of you too. That wonder of it. And then there's this being out of our depth, this unexpected happening, which is there, and we can't walk around it too long. It's there, so we have to notice it. And I wonder whether one of the things that's happened over these months is that this disturbance and unsettling of our normal patterns has also kind of opened up a window into what's not really working in our world, into perhaps some of the attitudes, particularly towards relationship, that have led and lead to disintegration more than connection and community. But I don't know about you, but I always feel a bit depressed really. I go out and I see rubbish that someone's left there. And it's usually, isn't it, it's things to do with drinks or fast food, but it's that sense of kind of rubbishing or not being aware of the environment on which we depend. And on a larger picture, because we, as humankind, have a kind of exploitative, grabbing what we need, those kind of attitudes, it's often the poorest who are most affected. And that's certainly true in this time of coronavirus. This is another piece of news we don't want to go back to, isn't it? Yeah. The whole Brexit thing. And maybe but what it opened up was how divided we can be about so many things. How easily we get into camps. we talk about the other as a threat. How power and even truth gets manipulated. And in the Bible, our relationships with one another are right at the core of who God is, because God is a God of relationship, of giving and receiving. This from the prophet Amos. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. One of the other prophets, Jeremiah, he said, the people, they've forsaken me, the fountain of living water. And instead what they've done is they've built leaky cisterns that do not hold water. And the sense of the life of God, this life of giving and receiving and relationship and community, it's like a stream. It's a living thing. But perhaps these months have shown us how we've turned away as humankind from those ways of relating. I've been really struck over the last, this year really, I've kind of rediscovered something that Pope Francis brought out some years back, 4 or 5 years ago, a teaching letter which he called Laudato Si, which comes from a prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. And in it, he wants to talk to people, not just in the church, but in the world. Not to tell them how they should be living, but to want to enter into dialogue and conversation about our common home, Earth. And this is one of the things he said. I'll read it because it's probably a bit difficult to read. Men and women have constantly intervened in nature. But for a long time, this meant being in tune with and respecting the possibilities offered by the things themselves. It was a matter of receiving what nature itself allowed, as if from its own hand. Now, by contrast, we're the ones to lay our hands on things, in attempting to extract everything possible from them, while frequently ignoring or forgetting the reality in front of us. The relationship has become confrontational. There's a Jewish philosopher and theologian called Martin Buber, and he talked about different types of relationships. He said some relationships are I-it. When it's I-it, the other person or the thing or creation or whatever it is only really exists to meet my need. It's an object. All of us have felt like at different times what it's like to be used. When somebody sees you, they don't really see you. They just see you for what you can give them, and you feel used. That's a kind of I-it relationship. An I-thou relationship is a relationship of reverence and respect, even wonder for the other. Allowing the other to be the other. They're not there just for me. When you're in that kind of relationship with another person, that feels a safe and good place to be. And perhaps as humanity, we have such power. As Pope Francis says here, never has humanity had such power over itself. Yet nothing ensures that it'll be used wisely, particularly when we consider how it's currently being used. We're in a time when we thought, generally we can manage things. And if we don't understand something in the moment, we can look it up on the internet, we can find the answer. And now we're in this place where we realise actually we cannot manage and we cannot fully understand. And that's deeply unsettling. But I wonder whether it might also be liberating. It might even give us a window into a better way of relating. Because so often when we can manage, what we do is we grasp and we use, and we don't know the damage that we do. Where profit alone counts, Pope Francis says, there can be no thinking about the rhythms of nature, its phases of decay and regeneration, the complexity of ecosystems. And he goes on to say that creation is just there as a kind of resource, an economic resource. And what kind of world do we want to leave to our children? He asks that question. And he says this question not only relates to the environment in isolation, because one approach would be, well, if we manage carbon capture, or if we all buy up our electric cars or whatever it is, we'll solve it. But what he was kind of pointing to was actually the issue is a much deeper one. It's actually about our relating and the shape and the attitudes within our relating. Unless, he said, we struggle with these deeper issues, I do not believe our concern for ecology, for the planet, will produce significant results. And that kind of takes us to Francis of Assisi. When Pope Francis chose the name Francis, I think because he had a sense of he is a person for our time. This image of Francis is probably the earliest that we have, painted during his lifetime, so in the early 13th century. And Bonaventure was one of the people who wrote about Francis fairly near to his life. And he talked about different people. One was a shepherd, David. The other a fisherman, Simon Peter. The last was a merchant that would purchase the pearl of the gospel life, selling and giving away all he had for the sake of Christ. And Francis of Assisi was the son of a wealthy merchant. And you're familiar, I expect, with the story of how this rich young man became deeply dissatisfied with a kind of way of living based on money and a relationship to things and to others based on having, holding, grasping. to such extent that in the end he gave everything away to follow Christ. You've got this cross in your church, haven't you? It's the San Damiano cross, and this figured very largely in Francis of Assisi's conversion. And I don't know whether you've looked at this cross. You might look at it now, it's not absolutely clear, but you've got the figure of Jesus on the cross, but he's alive. And behind him there's a dark space. That's the empty tomb. And at the top of the image, Christ is ascending. It's a sort of an image of the whole Easter mystery. But what happened for Francis, I think, when he gazed at this picture, was he understood something of God's way of relating. We tend to think of God as Almighty God, and sometimes we use that phrase in our prayers, Almighty God. For Francis, God was all humble God. The God who doesn't cling or grasp or dominate, but the God who gives away and lets go and shares all. And if you look at this image of Jesus on the cross, there's this incredible sense of openness. Openness to us, presence to us. For Francis of Assisi, one of his favourite prayers was, apparently, "Who are you, God, and who am I?" And the more he looked at God, this all-humble God, the more he saw and understood who he was, who we are. The shape of our relating flows from how God relates to us. A God who is humble, relational, alongside, and creative. And that underpins our attitude to the environment, to those who are different from us, to our relationships in our families and communities, and so on. I won't read all that out, but Francis' response, Pope Francis said, to the world around him, it wasn't about what can I get from it. For him, every creature was a brother or a sister. If we approach nature and the environment without this openness to awe and wonder, if we no longer speak the language of fraternity and beauty in our relationship with the world, our attitude will be that of masters, consumers, ruthless exploiters, unable to set limits on our immediate needs. But if we feel intimately united with all that exists, then sobriety, care will well up spontaneously. The poverty, the austerity of St. Francis, he said, were no veneer of asceticism, but something much more radical, a refusal to return reality into an object simply to be used and controlled. I, it, I, you. And that, I think, brings us back to thinking about fall. Fall, this letting go, abundant letting go. The fruit falls, the leaves fall to feed the earth. Life is letting go, and life is pouring out. As there's a feast on the wayside hedge and the woodland floor, flowers fade, seeds fall, but letting go their life, they set life free for another season. And that movement is also needed of us. To be fruitful, you have also to let yourself fall. And autumn comes each year to remind us of that rather than cling, we must let go. Rather than withhold or hoard, we must share. Life is either generous or it's not life at all. Jesus talking about his own line. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. So this sense of, who are you, God? And who am I? Who are we? Going down into that deep water of who God is, gazing at the cross, letting our lives take that shape. So I want to just highlight perhaps some invitations that flow from this sense of fruitfulness goes with fall, with a God who is all humble. We're going to look at each of these in turn, just briefly. And as we look at them, it may be there's something that speaks to you in a more personal way. Some movement, some shift in attitude or action in your own life. So the first is letting go of grasping onto power over others. Jesus who said, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. I say grasping, it's like that, isn't it? And you can feel sometimes people who are in power, they do that, they're kind of holding on tight, quite fearfully, really. And how damaging that can be. And this sense of what we're called to is this relational open hand that's about service. Don't be possessed by your possessions. Therefore I tell you, says Jesus, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. Consider the lilies, how they grow. Look at the birds of the air. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I've done quite a lot of worrying about what I'm going to eat and how I'm going to live over these last months, because all of a sudden all my work disappeared. So what do I do now? And how many households and how many people has that been true for? And it's not unnatural to worry about those practical things. And we have to think practically. Yet there's something about not being so obsessed and caught in that fear that we somehow move out of our awareness of God as a God of giving and receiving, in whom we are called to relationship. Adopting attitudes of reverence and respect to the other, whether the other's another person. I remember dreaming up a title for a course, which was Loving Our Difficult Neighbours. You know? It's quite hard to love your difficult neighbours. Sometimes the most difficult neighbour in a way is ourselves. Even loving ourselves is quite hard work. And sometimes we don't respect and value the gift of who we are. And in this wonderful prayer of Francis of Assisi, he talks, called the Canticle of the Creatures, and he talks about Brother Sun and Sister Moon and Mother Earth and Brother Wind and Air. All praise be yours, my Lord, through Sister Water, so useful, lowly, precious and pure. We're all related. And just going outside as we've been doing, and in our gardens, going for walks and seeing seasons moving, and sun and rain and smells and colours. How many brothers and sisters we have. You know, we live in this relational world, a wonderful world. And really to be present to what's in front of you and to be filled with wonder. And then to let that flow to our relationships with anybody, really. That respect and reverence. And that's quite hard to see, and resting in the fruitful ground of humility. Learn from me, Jesus says, for I am gentle and humble in heart. You will find rest for your souls. When we think about humility, sometimes we think of it as, miserable worm or being a doormat. But actually humility isn't that. It's, the root of the word is to do with earth. It's really about being grounded, earth. Earthed in your relationship with God, fundamentally. And where in that relationship you really come to a sense of who you are. With your frailty and with your strength and your gift. And really facing that reality and not being afraid of it, because God is not afraid of it. And then I don't need to be afraid of someone else's personality or difference from me. So this call to humility, the all-humble God. And learning to receive and to give, this is the life of God, this relational way of being. Give, Jesus said, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back. I find it harder to receive than to give. I don't know about you, because when I'm giving, I'm in control. When I'm receiving, I'm vulnerable. Actually, but it's really important to receive. And we are this Thomas Merton, who writes about prayer, he said, we're a body of broken bones. You know? But with the Spirit, with God, we're knit together, we make a whole. We need each other. So this vulnerability of trust that allows relationship with God to grow. Faith, not as certainty, not as not having any doubts, but faith as saying yes, sometimes even despite what you feel, to that God is there and holding me. The vulnerable trust and openness that allows depth of relationship to grow. And I really think this season, this time, when we've all been upset, if you like, all disturbed and thrown around in different ways, with all the gifts of it that you've received too. Maybe it invites that deeper trust. Life isn't something ever we're going to be able to manage or wholly understand. So maybe we have to live with mystery. Maybe we have to live with uncertainty. And in it, meet God and find God meeting us. And finally, this is about a movement somehow from fear to love. God is undefended and open. The one who is secure is not the one who builds walls against others, but the one who has no need of walls. And that sense of the closed fist, the open hand, the symbol of violence and aggression, and holding and hoarding, and the symbol of relationship, community, giving and receiving. The shape of God's life and relating, the shape of the relationship and life we are called to. We're going to have just a short space now, just to let something of that breathe in. I think we've said we're going to try and finish at 4 o'clock. So is that what you understand, I think? Yeah. So maybe could we be back by 5 to 4? Would that be all right? And we'll just have a short time of prayer to gather things together. Okay. So, but have a breath for 10 minutes now and stay here. Just let that soak in, or get a breath of air, and then we'll come back together.